this?
Yes, that would be sure. we were gonna jump on you about that, but I happened to forget about it till just as you mentioned it. Yeah, it'd be a good idea.
And we'll start sharing. Because I did compile all the answers.
Nice.
And put it in a PowerPoint, in a very, very basic PowerPoint, but a PowerPoint nonetheless. All right. Can you guys see that full screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
It's missing right now. It was a pie chart. There it is.
Yeah.
Right there.
Okay.
You keep changing the screen.
Yeah, no, I was just making sure I'm at the top of the presentation. So yeah,
it is not now.
Sorry, say that again.
I said it's not right now. All we're seeing is the background and the squares. You hit the pie chart.
Office has that weird habit of doing that.
How's that?
Yeah, it's still broke.
It's broken.
It breaks when you're not on top of the window.
Oh, okay, interesting.
That's fine right there. We can see that.
Yeah? Okay.
Well, not anymore. That's bad.
Yeah, no.
It's now broken again. Yeah.
Okay.
I think, just have to focus on the window and it should be fine.
Okay.
Probably.
So that's good.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we can see the whole computer now.
Yeah.
Or
there you
just
go.
PowerPoint.
That's even better.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I'm assuming, okay, we'll leave it like that. Okay, so yeah, tonight won't be too long. I know I say that every time, so we'll see how long it actually goes. But basically, over the last 6-7 months, I've been practicing more and more for races, and kind of needing to make more out of each hour that I'm practicing. And given
efficiency.
Yeah, exactly. And given we're at the beginning of the season, we probably have a few new guys with us, and maybe girls. I have no idea, but yeah. So I figured I'd go over kind of the basic thing of sim racing, other than having fun, which is always the most important. But yeah, how do we go about our practice? The first question I asked was, maybe it wasn't the one I was most interested in, but I was quite interested in this one. And like, as you guys can see, we've got a fair number of people in the basically 1 to 5 range, but most of you are in that 3 to 4 hours, which is a really good amount of time. Yeah. And I mean, I won't say concerning, but 1 to 2 hours, it depends what you're looking for out of sim racing. And that was the first thing I really wanted to say during this presentation, is it's a lot of what I'm going to say. I might say you need to do more of this, or you need to do less of that. And some of it needs to be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt, because the end goal is to have fun. And if you're someone who only wants to dedicate an hour or two to practice every week and then do a race, that's okay. So it's not to say that you shouldn't be having fun that way. But I'm kind of going at this presentation assuming that most of you are here to learn, and if you're here to learn, then you probably care about getting better. And so what I will say is 1 to 2 hours of practice a week is not really enough to improve significantly relatively quickly. If it's all you can afford, like you've got family stuff going on and stuff, obviously it's all you can afford to do that, and it's great. And a lot of what I'll say here will still be completely applicable. But if you're in a group where or if you're in the section of people that can do more practice, but is only doing 1 or 2 hours a week for the race, I would suggest trying to up that a little bit, because you will see that start to pay off. I would say ideally, if you've got the time to dedicate to it, 4 to 6 hours is a really good amount of time to. That
would be throughout the entire week, though.
Throughout the entire week, and at one track in one car. Right. It's important to note that, because again, people are going to have all different ways of going sim racing, but we are talking about improving here. So yeah, 4 to 6 hours throughout the week, leading up to the race in one car at one track. You can try different cars at the same track. I would say that's maybe the one place you can play around a little bit. But again, the cars are quite different. Like going from a Porsche to a Merc is a pretty big change. So yeah, do keep that in mind. Most of you know that, but still like to say it. So yeah, 4 to 6 hours is a really good amount of time. I was happily surprised to see that there's even 10% of you doing 7 or more hours. And for those of you who are in that bubble, you guys can make a lot of ground quickly if you're using that time well. So after that, this one I can't say I'm massively surprised to see that that 45% of people didn't have a specific plan when they practice. And I mean, it was quite a vague question, so maybe you have more of a plan than you think you do. But I'll use this slide to kind of outline what I want to do today, and it's pretty basic. Like it's figuring out, what's the point of us practicing? What are we trying to achieve? And how do we achieve it? And for me, like I do want to give everybody who's listening to it now and then watching the recording an actual plan to be able to do that. So I'm kind of operating on a 6-hour practice week, and you can tailor the basically the rough percentages to your number of hours of practice. But the basic thing that I've found that works really well and that works with what we're trying to achieve through the week is splitting it into kind of 2-hour blocks. So hours 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6. And I would say what we're trying to achieve here is not just lots of time on track, but effective time on track. So if you're going out and doing 500 laps, and I had a question on this, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later. Like if you're just going out and driving around the track with no specific plan of what to do, like you're just going out and doing laps and hoping to improve, you will improve. It's not that you won't. It's just you're not coming anywhere near making the best use of that time, because all you're doing is just repeating a kind of nebulous set of inputs throughout the lap, and you're often not, you're going to be making micro corrections because you went way too deep one corner and you're like, okay, I'll back it up a little bit, but you're not doing anything specific, and you're not setting yourself direct targets like we talked about in some of the other clinics to be able to improve the lap time. So that's where you really do want to be able to break your practice down, and then every time you get in the rig, whether it's for just half an hour to practice or if it's for an hour and a half, that's where like you sit down in the rig and you're like, this is what I'm doing for the next 45 minutes. And it's not just I'm doing laps, it's I'm doing laps and I'm focusing on X, or I'm doing laps and I'm figuring out all my breaking points today, or I'm figuring out the first sector even. Different people will like to approach it different ways. So that's where the first thing I'll say is I would personally recommend for the first 1 to 2 hours, again, assuming a total of 6 hours, that you go out on track, and this is kind of just the learning the track phase, even if you know the track well. Like it just takes time to reacclimatize, especially if you haven't done it in a while. You obviously probably are not racing the same track 2 weeks in a row. So you got to unlearn all the tendencies you had from the previous track, get to this new one. And for that first 1 to 2 hours, I would actually strongly recommend not going out on track with anyone else. Larry's probably wincing, but the reason I say that is because you need this time to be able to focus quite attentively to all the inputs that you're doing. Like you have if you know the track well, you have an idea of where you're meant to be apexing, where you're supposed to be braking, and all that stuff. But it takes time to really be precise about it. And if especially if there's lots of people on, if there's 2 or 3 people in HOP, then hop on HOP by all means. But if it's kind of the busy time of the night in HOP, or on anything else, and you're still trying to learn, and you've constantly either you're catching people or people are catching you, and every time that you're at a corner, or basically every time it's not happening on a straight, you're being compromised, and you're not learning where the kind of all the optimal points are, and it really slows your progress because you don't then have a baseline. More experienced drivers, better drivers will be able to cope with that a little bit better. Generally, they just have a larger bank of knowledge of tracks and cars, but they're also just more comfortable in the car. So, if you're quite a quick driver, silver or gold, you can definitely shorten this time down. Maybe you need it 45 minutes to an hour alone. But even me, like I probably spend 2 hours alone on track before hopping into a public lobby, just to do more practice in. That's the first thing I'll say is that first section of practice time is really important to get your baseline down. That's what you're aiming for. Like if you get in the rig, first time after your race, the previous week, preparing for the next, like take all the pressure off yourself. Just say, I'm out here alone. I'm learning the track. I'm trying to establish a strong baseline for all my inputs. So that's braking point, turn-in point, beginning of trail braking, apex, and then back on the throttle.
Would you suggest possibly doing this in practice for the first hour? Just in a practice session instead of HOP?
Yes, yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. I would strongly suggest doing that. Doing it in your own private practice session with no other cars on track. But
make sure that it's actually set for practice, because any other setting doesn't have the same characteristics as HOP or a live server would, because
exactly.
You don't have tire wear, you don't have fuel usage, and the track doesn't change, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to get it as close to what HOP is going to be at, and obviously like changing track conditions and everything. And then once you get that baseline down, then you can move away from that. But that's where I would say like you're able to really plan your first little bit, get your baselines down, and then you can evolve from there. And then we can move on to the next one. So it was close to 50-50, but not quite. So improving specific skills. And this is what I would suggest for probably your hours 3 and 4. So the middle section of your practice. So this is once you already have a good baseline down. You're not going wide at a lot of corners, or braking too deep, all that kind of stuff. So you're already in a consistent rhythm. Then you can start to practice specific skills. And what I like about doing this in the middle is it solidifies what you started to build on at the beginning, alone on track, of all those kind of, so if you're braking at the 100-meter board for the first turn, you're still braking at the 100-meter board for the first turn. It's just now you're practicing a specific skill through the corner, and you're focusing on that. But it solidifies that kind of brain memory, muscle memory of what you're doing through the corner, and kind of at that point you're able to build consistency at the same time as you're improving whatever skill you're working on. And that's why I like to stick that in the middle, because it's kind of got a dual purpose, and you can build your consistency without having to focus on consistency, because focusing on consistency is like massively boring. So you'll find yourself, like, once you go through this phase of skill improvement, like you'll finish that, you spend an hour, 2 hours. I mean, again, it depends how much time you have to practice in the week, but let's say 1 to 3 hours on skills, and then you'll finish that 3 hours and you'll go back out on track with other cars, and you're just like, what the heck, I'm so consistent, like I can hit this lap time within 2 or 3 tenths every lap, and I'm barely thinking about it. It's because you probably did 100 to 150 laps just practicing skills, but at the same time you were trying to make sure that you were staying on track and all that stuff. But on the specific topic of improving skills, it's really important that you go out and like actively practice. Like anybody who played sports, instruments, anything that requires any amount of practice and skill, like you know that if you're not directly targeting, whatever it takes to excel at the task, you're not going to improve very quickly. Again, like I said, you can go out and do 500 laps and not focus on anything, and you will get better, but it's really slow. So I strongly suggest, and I would say taking 30 to 45 minutes of a session to focus on one particular skill. So if that's trail braking, if it's your transition into trail braking, if it's getting on the throttle a little bit smoother, if it's even just like looking ahead, like focus on looking ahead. It's like we hear it so much in sim racing, but like just focus on looking, as you're arriving at the braking point, look for your braking point. Once you start braking, you're already looking at the apex. Once as you arrive at the apex, you're already looking for your exit, and like force your brain to do that. And you're gonna be slower as you do that. So like, don't worry about being slower. It's just about building the habit. And I would say, 30 to 45 minutes is generally all your brain can take of trying to do that one specific skill, because obviously things are happening really quick in a race car, so it's usually like once you get to that time limit, you're kind of fried. So I wouldn't try and push it. You can kind of tell in your brain, you're like, I'm not focusing anymore, like, so don't try and push it after that. If you've done 30 good minutes, that's already a big win. But definitely use your practice time to try and improve those skills, and start where you're struggling. So yeah, that's what I say for that. I'll stop for a second because I said a lot. Yeah, go on.
Would you suggest to possibly concentrate on one sector of a track in the same, say, time span here? Or would that be a little bit more, say, involved, I guess you could say?
Would you like so like practicing a specific skill in a specific sector?
Or just overall a sector to get better at that particular sector? I mean, so you're saying specific skill, excuse me, you're saying specific skill, but you're not talking about getting better at a specific portion of the track with a skill. Am I correct?
Yeah, you are correct. So
Okay.
I'm talking only about literal driving skills, so that it's either your inputs or your vision, that kind of thing.
Okay,
If
that makes sense. Okay, I got it.
I would put focusing on a particular sector of track in two places, actually. At the end of the first portion of your practice, so in our kind of 6-hour timeline, I would say at the end of your 2 first hours.
Okay.
And then I would put it at the end in hours 5 and 6 as well, if you're still struggling in a particular area. The reason for that is, like, so once you've got a good baseline at the beginning of our practice, then you can kind of filter out and be like, okay, so sector 1's good, I'm really struggling in sector 2, let's put a little bit more brain power towards that. Then we move into phase 2 of the practice, and then we're pretty much dealing with skills. And then when we get into our final phase of practice, we've worked on our skills, we've built off our baseline as well, so now we're super consistent, probably, and we have a really good feel for the car. That's the other thing too. So by working on your skills, especially if it's braking, braking related, you're gonna have a really good feel for balance of the car. And so that's why in the final phase 3 of practice, you can kind of start to target again, and with that updated knowledge through phase 2, we can really focus on a particular sector that we're struggling in and have a better understanding of how we might be able to fix it. Any other questions, comments, criticism?
Could you give an example of a couple skills for some of the guys that maybe haven't focused on practicing certain skills before?
Yeah, for sure. I would say, I guess it depends how you define a skill, but I would say some of the first ones I would look at are like car placement. So going through the lap, like, am I using all the track, both on entry and on exit? We talked about that a little bit in some of the other clinics, so if you haven't watched those and are interested or want to rewatch them, you can go back. They're all in the coaching resources section. So yeah, I think maybe one of the first ones would be car placement, so using all the track. Second one would be braking. So am I using the full potential of the brakes? So that's, braking at your max pressure for that corner. And then braking is so complicated that you kind of need to separate it into I'd say 3 phases. So that's your peak braking, so you're slowing the car down. The middle phase is your transition between slowing the car down and rotating the car, and then your final phase of braking is your trail braking. And in trail braking, we're not slowing the car down. What we're doing is we're rotating the car. Like that's the reason why we have 5 to 10% of brake going into the corner is to help the car rotate in the corner. We're not concerned about slowing it down anymore. So you can practice one of those 3 sections of braking. Generally, you want to start with the first one, so that's having a mindful focus on making sure that you're properly applying the max amount of pressure needed at whatever corner you're at. Obviously, the more difficult one is making sure you're smooth in your transition, and then smooth on your trail braking as well. Those are more difficult ones to master, but that's another example of a skill. Looking ahead, like I was saying, is another really important skill that I struggle with so like crazy. Like I'm often looking way too close to the car, so that's another example. Light hands. So we want to basically, especially in the corners, you want as little force on the steering wheel through your forearms and your hands, because that extra force actually makes us a lot less accurate. It removes some of the feeling in our hands as well. So practicing braking and going through the corner with really light hands, and focusing on trying to feel what's happening with the car. That's another skill that you can work on.
Basically, not just death grip on the wheel, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. There's lots of reasons for it. One of the most obvious, or probably least obvious, but ones that makes one of the biggest differences, and if you have ever driven the P-Cup car, it's really clear. Like if you have a death grip on the wheel in the braking zone, you'll notice the car locks up way easier, even with the same brake pressure. So if you're braking at 90% and you have a death grip on the wheel, versus braking at 90% and you're holding it really lightly, you'll lock up way easier if you've got a death grip on it. And it's because you're not allowing the front axle to make micro adjustments as the car rotates a little bit under braking, basically. So it's that kind of really tiny side to side movement as it squirms as you're on the limit of braking. So if the lighter your hands are, the more you're allowing that front axle to just adjust a little bit and not break traction. Because if you're holding it completely straight, it just it's headed in one direction.
Is that sensitive that it will lock up because your hands are holding the wheel straight?
Yeah, and to be honest, almost all cars will. Wow. ABS helps. Okay. But if you're really on the limit, and again, we're talking, we're at this point we're talking very small differences, but it's important to eventually practice all those skills, and all those small differences constitute good lap times. But yeah, the P-Cup is a really good example of a car that will, like in a really difficult braking zone. So let's say, the Forest Elbow at Bathurst, so that the really tight left-hander before the final straight. We all know that's a difficult corner to begin with, but if you're just on the limit of locking up and you're holding that steering wheel too tight, it will lock up on you, versus if you're holding it nice and light. That's another example of a skill. That hopefully is enough enough examples. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on.
I have one.
Go on.
What stage in your 3 stages would you look at track guides or other people's laps?
I would say, actually, I tend to use those through all of phases 1 and 2, and maybe even into phase 3. It depends how comfortable you are with the track, but like before I do a single, more recently I've been trying to compare myself to like figure out where my baseline is, but up until very recently, I wasn't doing a single lap until I had looked at an example lap. And in some other sims, there's a little bit more data available. But if you're into Motec, then you can look at actual data prior to going on the circuit, and I would recommend that. It's like you absolutely do not need to go into telemetry to improve a lot. So don't go thinking that's your. I don't just mean that you that asked the question. I just mean everybody. Like you don't. It's not essential to getting better. So, but yeah, I won't generally do a lap without first looking at someone who's very good do it. The important thing to keep in mind, especially on ACC, I find, is a lot of the example laps are all like hot laps, quali fuel, like perfect temps. So it's really more of a guide of like roughly where you should be braking, what the general line looks like, rather than I need to copy these inputs exactly, because most of the time you're going to have more fuel with more used tires at a hotter temp. So yeah, it's more of an idea. But yeah, I'm looking at telemetry all through phases 1 and 2, because I'm constantly comparing what I'm doing to what the best people in the world are doing, and where I can improve. Yeah, that's my take on telemetry and all that, and example laps and other people's replays too. Like if you're in HOP with and you can save the replay and look at the fastest person's lap. You won't always know how much fuel they were on, but thankfully virtually everyone in HOP is really nice, so maybe they'll tell you what fuel they were on when they set that lap. But we have the ability to check out those laps super easy as well. So yeah, all the time. The last phase is a little bit less because you're fine-tuning your own capabilities, and at that point you're not really looking for massive amounts of improvement. You're kind of finalizing consistency and beginning to figure out like, okay, where can I pass and stuff. But yeah, that would be my take on that one. That leads us really well into the second one. Thank you. I think that was JD. Yeah, so I was happy to see that almost 60% of people were using replays data to take a look at what they're doing. Yeah, self-evaluation is really important. We all naturally do some just while we're on track. Like it's not to say that if you're not using it, you're not doing any self-evaluation. But I would really recommend at the kind of bare minimum, like looking at a replay in Helicam, to be able to see if you're using all the track on your entry and on your exit. Like so many people think that they're using all the track, and then they're like, if you show them like, oh, like I've got half a car or I've got a few feet, and a few feet makes a difference, like you especially over the course of a whole track. So yeah, I would strongly recommend using replays to your advantage. You can definitely learn some stuff, and this is just looking at your own data. This isn't even, you're not even beginning to compare yourself yet. That's the next slide. But yeah, definitely use replays. And this, I would say, phases 1 and 2 are pretty important, especially in phase 1, because that's where we're really building the baseline. So phase 1, definitely look at replays. If you've got data available, definitely use that, because that's where you're trying to figure out if you're getting the maximum out of your practice or not.
One other thing I could say about using the replays is make sure to use different views.
Yeah.
Not just from the normal view that you would be driving from, but the other one is the farthest trail cam. That gives you a better idea of where you are on track position, say full left going into a right-hand corner or something of that nature, or how close you got to the apex when you went through that particular corner. And also you could possibly spot better brake markers that won't disappear during the race. And what I mean by that is everybody knows that there's, some tracks have the little white markers on the side of the track and that sort of thing. A lot of times those get taken out. So you need alternatives to work with. And while you're doing that kind of thing too, you could look for other points of reference to understand where you are on track, because sometimes if you're behind somebody, not only can you not see your brake marker, but you might miss the apex of a corner or your turn-in point because you are so close and you don't have a reference really of where you're actually driving. So those are the things you might want to look for too. While you're watching the replays, you might see something, outside the car that you don't generally see right off the bat because you're concentrating on driving from inside the car.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And honestly, like even I find that farthest chase cam, and this applies in the two main sims that I'm in, including ACC. Like I find that you can notice the car is over rotating. Even sometimes when you didn't notice it in the car, like a little correction, like of counter steer when you're in the car, and if you go on the outboard shot, like you're like, oh, I was actually really sliding there. I mean, really, like, not drifting, but there's more of a slide than you thought, and that's kind of stuff that you may not have known if you're not looking at that replay. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, that's. Replays are super important, and then getting into the second section of that is using outside sources. So that's what we're talking about earlier, is like looking at example laps, looking at other drivers,
Coaches.
HOP, coaches, and then yeah, I said don't worry about telemetry before. It's not to say that it's not really useful. It's super useful. So if you can do it, definitely do it. But basically what I was trying to say earlier was don't waste practice time trying to figure out telemetry. If you're midway through a practice week, like, you're not going to suddenly find 2 seconds by, spending 4 hours setting up Motec and all that kind of thing. Like it takes time. So if you want to do it gradually, but don't sacrifice practice time for that. Yeah, kind of do it on the outside. Yeah, but if you can figure it out, definitely go take a look at telemetry if you can. Super useful. But yeah, use outside sources, because, and that's kind of one of the questions I asked a little bit later on was like, do you feel stuck? There's time out there that I know I know is achievable, but I feel like I'm at my max, and that's where looking at someone else who's faster is a lot of the time what can help unblock things. So I would say it's a combination between two things. It's improving skills and looking at faster people. So improving skills is pretty obvious why that's going to help you break that barrier. But in terms of looking at other people, it's like sometimes it's just a way of driving that we can't necessarily conceive of on our own. And then watching someone else do it, it clicks. And that's where sometimes looking at other people really helps kind of break that barrier that we're trying to get past. So yeah, definitely look at outside sources right from the beginning. The only place I would say where you probably can start tapering that off is towards the end of your practice. So in phase 3, if you're really struggling with like one corner, maybe take a deeper dive into looking at that still in phase 3. That's okay. But best use is probably phases 1 and 2.
One thing too is don't be afraid to ask questions from other people.
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, we try to have our community is a very good community. There's a lot of helpful people, a lot of people that can answer questions, other people that can point you in the right direction. And, like I said, like I've always said, the only question that's a dumb question is the one that you did not ask.
Yeah. And that's so true in racing. Like, yeah, the amount of time, like, yeah, sometimes it seems so simple, but it's such a crucial piece of information, and you're wasting your own time by not asking the question, because most of the time someone's got the answer. So
yeah, don't be bashful. Be like, oh, I'm too embarrassed to show my bad lap. No, show your crappy laps so we can help you get better.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what everybody's there for, to enjoy the hobby, and you're not going to enjoy it if you
that's the next new channel, Crappy Lap Channel.
Yeah. And if you are posting a lap, I will post this piece of advice, or if you're looking at your telemetry, never, ever, ever, ever take your fastest lap, because you're not going to learn anything there. most of the time, because most of our fastest laps, that goes for pretty much everyone, barring aliens, basically, it was a lucky lap. It's not what it's you managed to hit it. So always take a roughly average lap, middle of the stint. It's a decent lap. You obviously want something that's representative. Don't post a terrible lap. But yeah, something in the middle, because that gives a really good idea. If you're looking at your own telemetry, it gives you a good idea of what you're doing on most laps. Or if you're having someone else look at it, it's like, this is what I'm actually doing, rather than this fantastic lap that you pulled off once and can't repeat. So just a side tip for when you're sending lap files to other people or videos. Yeah, moving on. So this is the one where I kind of already talked about this. But this one really shows that most people, over 50% of people are practicing without a plan.
You wanted to say it, just say it.
Yeah. Most people are practicing without a plan, and to be fair, I was for a really long time too. So there's no need to feel bad about it. It's just a question of we're spending all this time in the rig. We love sim racing. We like being competitive. So how do we make better use of our time? And most of the time it's just because you don't know how to approach practice. You've got all this time that's available to you throughout the week. You need to get faster, but other than that, you don't have any real time blocked way of doing that. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to provide for you guys today, at least a rough outline. You guys can tailor it to what you find works for you. But yeah, so obviously I'd prefer if this graph was much more skewed the other way, but it's just a question sometimes of not knowing. So yeah, we talked about getting stuck already, so I'll kind of I'll move on from that. This one is really important, actually. Actually, I'll just go back to this. Most people feel like they're getting stuck, and that's really normal. So don't let that discourage you. It's really common. I feel it all the time. And I would say if you're not feeling stuck, either maybe you're a rookie and there's so much improvement to be made that you constantly feel like you're making gains, and that's normal and good, so don't worry about it. But if you don't feel like you're getting stuck and you're not an alien, I would say you're not thinking hard enough. I know it sounds harsh, but there for sure is lap time there for you. Again, if you're an alien, then fine, this doesn't apply. But you should sometimes feel like you're getting stuck, because at that point, that's where where certain skills are not up to scratch, and you need to continue to work on them to improve. So yeah, that's all I'll say on that. So yeah, this one's really important. Specifically, maybe not, but very much a kind of newer driver mentality, but we all get sucked into it, is going out for an hour in practice and being massively happy when you have done the best time that you've managed so far. And it's okay to be happy about it, but it shouldn't be the main goal of your practice, because again, most of the time that lap is only achievable, once in an hour kind of thing, proven by the fact that you only did it once in the hour, and probably you're on new tires on a cold track or something like that. So what we really should be aiming for is improving your race pace. So if you pick a given track, if one day you went out and you're doing regular 140s as race pace, the next time you go out, what you should be aiming for is to hopefully reduce that, and maybe be doing 139 sevens or sixes, something like that. I mean, that's a big drop depending on where you are in your practice, but you get my point. So that's what you should really be aiming about, and that's what you should be happy about, and that's generally easier to achieve than some kind of magical lap time. And that's that kind of just structures your practice. And it's the consistency that's going to win you races and get you good good finishing positions. Because the once in a 10 lap time is great. Yeah, maybe you gain some time on the person, but then they're catching you the other 9 laps. So what we're really aiming for is the consistency, and that's the bar basically for where you're at skill wise, because that's what you can do lap after lap, and that's your kind of flagpole for what you should be aiming to improve on. Yeah. And it's really hard. Like it's so easy to be really happy. Like, oh my goodness, I set my fastest lap. Things are going really well. And then, but if you look at your other laps, like you were destroying your tires trying to get that lap time, all that kind of stuff.
How many red laps you have because you went off track the tiniest little bit?
Exactly. This one I actually found really interesting. This was the one that I was most interested in. So we've got, you see here, on roughly 40 responses, 44% of people who are not improving more than a second over the course of their practice. This will be slightly tempered, tempered from 2 directions. First of all, the faster you are, so the closer you are to gold or in gold, or the fastest in gold, the less you're going to improve over the course of your practice time, and that's just simply because you're closer to the absolute max. So you can probably go out and be within 1% of the alien lap time, maybe not right away, but within the first half an hour to 45 minutes. So there's only so much improvement that you can get from that point, and every tenth of a percentage becomes harder and harder to get. Like speed. Obviously, 401 miles an hour is much harder to achieve than 100 to 101 kind of thing. So there's that. The other side of that is if you're only practicing for an hour or two prior to the race, you may not gain that much time. But really, if you're in the middle or you're a rookie, there's like tons of time to find if you're structuring your practice well. It may not seem like it in phase 1, like hours 1 and 2. You might be floundering a little bit, but like just trust the process. If you build your good baseline, and then you start to practice skills, and you're looking at people who are faster than you in your own lap times, like time will often come in chunks. You might be losing 3, 4, 5 tenths in one corner. I mean, depending. Like you might be losing a second in the corner, and then you figure out how to do it. You look at the line. You know how the car is meant to fill through the corner, and then you go out and you practice that, and you find. You maybe don't find the whole second, but you find 3 tenths, and 3 tenths at one corner is a lot. And if you do that over a few corners in the lap, well, boom, there's a second kind of thing. So there's tons of time to be found in practice, and even some of the really fast guys within 101, 102% of alien times are probably finding, from the first time they get on track to right before the race, they likely have found 2 seconds. So I would say probably most people should be in the 2 to 3 second range. Again, with those few caveats along the way. And now I can sort of finish up and give a few final thoughts and just kind of go through those 3 phases again. So I didn't talk much about phase 3, but that's I'll do that now. And basically, so once you've got your baseline, you know the track well, you've practiced your skills. What you want to start doing is that's when the time on track with other cars around really starts to pay off, because you are comfortable in what you're doing with the car on the track. And that's when you can begin to compensate for what other people are doing. Because before, if you try and hop on track with a bunch of people right away in phase 1, like you don't know what you're doing. So how the heck are you supposed to figure out what you're doing when there's two or three other cars around you, compromising your line, blocking your visual line to your braking reference, if you even have one at that point? Like, I hope that kind of makes sense in your minds of like, driving a race car is hard enough, even if it's in a sim. So, when you send yourself out at 150 kilometers an hour coming into a turn, miles an hour coming into a turn, and you've got another car, right up your behind or right in front of you, you already don't know what you're doing at the beginning of practice, so why would you be able to factor that in as well? So phase 3 is the really important part, and you shouldn't skip this phase of driving with other people. That, you know, all the coaches say it all the time, you should drive with other people, and it's really important to do that because, you know, we're racing after all. We're not just seeing who can be the fastest and consistent alone on track for 45 minutes. It's with other cars, and we're racing. So that's where, and phase 3 is for sure the most important time to be out on the track with other cars. And that's where you can begin to learn, you know, where to pass, how to set up, like, you know, where you can begin to set up a pass. So if there's a corner sequence and you can kind of get alongside but not fully pass, but you compromise them, that's where, you know, you already have all this bank of knowledge of in this case, 4 hours of practice and going around the track. You have that bank of knowledge where you can begin to make adjustments for what's going on track and know how that's going to change. So, you know, if normally you're going into a corner and you're braking at the 100-meter board, but now you're slightly alongside a car, so you're not right, you know, you're not on your normal line, you probably need to brake a little bit later, and probably you're on a slightly dirty piece of track, so your braking's not going to be as good, so you likely need to brake just a tiny bit later. And we're talking feet generally if you're quite close to each other, so you know, you're only a car's width off to the inside of the corner. But that's the kind of stuff you can start to take into account, and you have the brain capacity to do that because you've been at that corner 300 times already, so you know exactly where normally you're braking. So then you can, you know, you're already coming up to the corner going, okay, I probably need to brake a little bit earlier. Or especially if you're coming behind a car, so you're in the draft, so you're like, well, I was braking the 100-meter board and I was coming in at 200 miles an hour, and now I'm at 205 because of the draft. I'm gonna have to brake a little bit earlier, and that's the kind of thing you can start to think about. So phase 3, get on track with other cars, and what you're trying to figure out is how to race with other cars and fine-tune the places you're having trouble with. So those are basically 3 phases. 1, baseline. 2, skill improvement and pace/consistency building. Phase 3, racing situation practice, fine-tuning of problem areas throughout the lap. And basically when you wrap that all up, if you've split your time properly, even if you're using slightly less time than 6 hours, you've probably got a really, really good baseline for the race for that week. You know, you've made pretty much the best use you can of your time. You've almost certainly, I mean, you've definitely improved. If you do that, there's no question that you're going to improve. And then yeah, you've got a really good baseline to go race in. And the final thing I'll say is, I must have slightly mislabeled one of these graphs, but one of the questions I asked was, how many times are you, I think it's this one, how many times are you doing stints that are less than 15 laps long? And there were a lot of people that said I'm doing that relatively frequently. And the important thing to say there is, when you're doing these, all this stuff should be done over relatively long stints. Like, don't come out for 3-4 laps and then come back in unless you're making a really obvious setup change. And there's a specific reason I didn't talk at all about setup changes in this, because setup changes has very little to do with how you structure your practice. Like, it should almost be done separately. And I mean, everyone works differently, but that's kind of my take on it. But what you really need to do is get lots of laps in a row of practice, like 10, 15 minimum, except for the first few times you go out on track, you'll probably feel something in the car. But even then, you're feeling something, but okay, is it going to go away in 2 laps and I can just drive around it? That's a really big difference. And then you're going to find that, if you haven't been out for a race stint at all during your practice prior to the race, all of a sudden you're 30 minutes into a race on older tires with a different level of fuel, and the car might feel completely different to how it did at the beginning of the stint, and you're never going to know that was the case unless you were doing that in practice. And you should be doing it a lot in practice. You want to be driving through that middle phase, that end phase of the tires multiple times throughout your practice, so you get used to it. especially in cars like the Porsche, for example, because it's so dependent on the weight that's in the front of the car at the beginning of the race with all the fuel, and it begins to lighten up, and it gets things change completely in that car, and to a lesser extent in all the other cars. Like there's no car that feels the same all the way through the stint. So through all this practice that you're doing, and staying out on track for long periods of time, you're learning the car really, really well, and that begins to pay off in a lot of different circumstances throughout the race. Like if you do that, then you'll know that the car is going to, maybe it's feeling better in the middle stint, and someone that you've been stuck behind for 5-10 laps, you can pass because you can take advantage of something is coming. So it brings a little bit of patience into your game. It also means that if you pick up a little bit of damage, you're more able to deal with how the car is feeling, and you can drive around the problem. So yeah, I can't say enough, and I struggled with this as well, because we all most of the time for me it's like I push too hard and then I kill the tires really quick because I'm searching for a lap at the beginning. So if you want to stay away from that kind of that tendency, and drive as many laps in a row as you can as possible, and that goes for skill improvement as well. So like we don't want to just learn how to trail brake well when the tires are at their absolute best. We want to learn to trail brake well when they're going off, because it's different. So yeah, that's the final portion of that. So yeah, questions?
You had mentioned something about 500 laps earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I was maybe slightly exaggerating, but it'll depend on the track and the track time. But yeah, like lots of laps is good. But if you're doing 500 laps, you should be improving a ton, like a ton. That's a lot of seat time, and it's really good. Like if you can do it, go for it. Like I'm spend a lot of time in the rig myself, but yeah, I wouldn't say aim for, like, I would personally, again, it's going to depend for everyone, but personally I would say, like, don't aim for, like, I'm going to try and do 500 laps of practice this week. I would say we all know our schedules. I have 4 hours of practice. Here's how I'm splitting it up. What I'm aiming for is the best possible final race pace. And to me, that's kind of a better goal, because it's, if we did 500 laps, like, it's okay, we did it, but did we improve 30% of what we could have? Did we improve 70% of what we could have in that time? Yeah. So for me, that's a better way to put it, but we're all a little bit different.
One other thing I would suggest is make sure that you're not practicing while you're tired.
Yes. I forgot to say that. That's a really good point. Yeah. Don't force it. Really don't force it, because you're just going to ingrain bad habits. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Would you recommend finding a decent setup before practicing, or just go on track?
Setups, in my opinion, this is a long conversation. Yeah, I will try to keep it as brief as possible. Setups, in my opinion, are quite voodoo. The best drivers can pretty much drive any setup very quickly, and that information tells us that driving skill and knowledge outweigh setup. That's just for sure.
Wouldn't you say that is how you adapt to the car as it sits?
Yeah, exactly. So if you are better at all the things that, all the skills required to drive well, then you will be able to adapt to a setup. Now, I still will be sometimes up to a second faster on a good setup versus a bad one. So it's not to say they don't make a difference. What I will say is, especially in ACC, you can go quite quickly on either of the two baseline setups, and probably in the very many setups that are generously provided by a lot of the people in our group. So yes, I would say pick a setup before starting. If you want to do, like in the phase 1, if you want to try both the safe and the aggressive setup, for, I don't know, 30 laps each, and then pick one of the two and
At
go with that.
minimum
Yeah.
of 30 laps each to know how the car drives, feel what the car's doing,
Mhm.
figure out if it's you over driving or under driving the car for that particular setup.
Yeah.
And then you can determine which one will be better for you, or should I change my driving style a little bit to make this setup better?
Yeah. So yeah.
I'm sorry. I will say that if you're like 5 seconds off the pace, getting a paid tune or a fully custom tune isn't going to give you the 5 seconds.
Mhm.
They're not
You need to
magic, but they
focus
do
on your
help.
driving.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and something I was gonna say after. So yeah, like I don't want to say no because a good setup will help. Like it's true that is the case. But I guess this is just what I'll add to what JD was saying. Like the farther you are away from the alien lap time, or the more rookie you are, to put it in another way, like the less the setup is going to make a difference, and the more the difference is just in your pure driving. So especially if you're in rookie, maybe even in bronze. Mind you, bronze is so quick these days that like if you're in that area, like just pick a setup and drive kind of thing. The closer you get to silver, gold, alien level, whatever you want to call it, the more the setup is going to make a difference in your pace versus others. And I say that really carefully because, like, again, getting better at driving will always be faster than getting a setup, or almost always. And it's always more worth it. I guess that's probably a better way of putting it.
You have to understand the car before you can adjust it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll say from my personal experience, and obviously there's a kind of a paywall involved, but I really don't like spending a lot of time on setup changes. I've gone down that road before of really going deep in it, but I lose so much practice time by doing that, that I think everyone should have a basic understanding of car setup. But I don't believe that everyone should know how to fully set up a car. And so from the way I approach it, to be honest, at this point is like I prefer to pay for setups. If I'm going that route, like if I'm not just using one of the base setups, and honestly the base setups are quite good, so like don't think that they're like 2 seconds slower, because they're just not. But I prefer to not waste as much time on setting up the car, and just to start with something and stick with it and learn how to drive around it if there's certain things that I don't particularly like. That's my approach. But don't be, unless something is massively wrong, I would say don't be constantly doing setup changes through all the phases, because what you're doing is, one, you're sacrificing practice time, and two, you're constantly changing the baseline of what the car is doing. So what you want to be doing is continually building on knowledge, and if you change setup drastically, or even a little bit, that baseline changes, so you have to relearn some stuff. Small stuff like brake bias, maybe like a click or two on preload kind of thing, like that's okay. That's to help us maybe just get a little bit more rotation at the beginning of the corner kind of thing. That's all right. Like, I don't mean in-car adjustments like TC, ABS. We're talking kind of completely re-engineer the car because we think that we're 2 seconds off because it's a setup. So yeah, that's technically a short answer for that question, but still quite long.
And
if I add something to it?
Yeah, go on.
So most setups, like for example, default aggressive, is like based on a setup philosophy. So sticking to like one setup base, like maybe aggressive default, helps you understand more of how the car is gonna react to that specific setup, as opposed to something like CDA or Go. So just learning the car and using just one setup base will help you get more consistent with the car overall. And overall, over the course of your rookie season, or just you learning car, you can fine tune the setup philosophy, like suit your driving style more, which is what I did when I did rookies. And just sticking to one philosophy, like one base, just helps with consistency. Just learning the track, you'd be worrying less about like changing the setup and more about learning your driving style, because you'd already be comfortable with whatever setup you were working with.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I thought I might have heard another question or comment. No?
You're hearing things.
I am. I apparently am hearing things. Well, that's, not out of the ordinary for me, so. Okay. Feel free to ask more questions if you still have any, but if not, then we'll wrap it up for today. And this will be posted, barring any technical issues, but I think I did test everything for 45 minutes before, so we should be good. Thanks for showing up, guys. Hopefully that helps. And if you have any questions, don't remember something, just let me know. I'll be happy to remind. Go make use of your practice.
Thank you very
Josiah.
much, Josiah. I
Thank you
appreciate
very
you
much.
coming and hanging out, man.